Most bands 15 years in are either retiring rich to the Caribbean or more likely giving up in disgust, but Porcupine Tree seems to be growing in influence, popularity and critical acclaim with each new album. How do you explain this unusual career trajectory of Porcupine Tree?
Well, it's kind of odd, isn't it? I mean, I don't know is the answer. I mean, I've never... I suppose if I could theorise as a kind in an objective way, I would say there's certainly an element of the musical climate having moved in our favour over the last 15 years, you know. And you have to obviously acknowledge the fact that when the band started in the early 90s, this was the worst possible time to be making this kind of psychedelic, progressive, art, rock music, whatever you want to call it. It's the worst possible time. We're talking about the heyday of sort of grunge music. And even the idea of a guitar solo was completely out the window at that time, you know. So, and I started off making these 20-minute long, you know, guitar freak-out type things. And so it was completely out of time and completely out of place and consequently was very much underground. And I think what's happened is obviously the band have evolved a lot over the years, but we've always kept this basic fundamental thing, which is the idea of exploring longer form pieces of music, of kind of fusing different kinds of music together, of more conceptual works, whatever you want, however you want to characterize it. And actually, interestingly enough, what's happened is that the musical climate has moved back towards our direction. So now you have bands like Muse, and you have bands like Radiohead, and you have bands like Sigur Rós and the Mars Volta, and all these bands that are very much in that progressive tradition or that art rock tradition, and are actually very fashionable bands, very trendy, and getting a lot of press and selling a lot of records. And I think that kind of move back to that more kind of ambitious rock album-orientated kind of climate has definitely helped to throw Porcupine Tree more and more into vogue, I like. But certainly not through planning. I mean, that's kind of lucky in a way. You know, it's taken a while, but I'm thankful finally that ambition is no longer a dirty word, apparently.
Well, Porcupine Tree is a bit of a phenomena in the modern musical landscape because you're not anti-establishment in the sense of ye old punk band, and you're certainly not the sort of group that is blatantly commercial. You seem to be in the envious position of being able to rise above all the noise that characterises the music business and simply create exactly what you want to create when you want to create it, and completely ignoring the notion of genre and pigeonholing. How did that come about, and how does that feel?
Again, it wasn't really through design. It all comes from the passion for the music. And I know I keep going on about this, and it seems like an obvious thing to say that we're passionate about music. But it's interesting that how sometimes you do suspect the motives for people making music. I sometimes wonder if people are making music purely from the heart, or if they're making music in order to cultivate this sense of, celebrity or antagonism or kind of controversy. And we've never done that. And in that sense, being the way we have, we've actually been more controversial and more anti-establishment than most of the bands that kind of go out of their way to be anti-establishment and controversial. Because we've simply done what we do regardless of whether it was fashionable or not. And we've managed to build up a huge following, really by touring and by releasing quality albums and by keeping faith with the fan base. Now, how unfashionable is that as a kind of way to make music these days? Unfortunately, it's very unfashionable, but it should be, really, if you think about it, that should be the only way anyone makes music. But unfortunately, we find ourselves in a minority of groups that seem to make music purely for the reasons of love and passion for making it. So, in that respect, we've become anti-establishment in a way that perhaps we never intended to be. I would love for our music to have been embraced by the establishment. I tell you, it would have made things a lot easier over the last 15 years. But it wasn't. For whatever reason, it wasn't embraced, and we had to really fight and struggle for every single fan that we added to our fan base. We almost had to, fight for that. And I'm glad that, in a way, now in retrospect, that's the way we've done it, because we don't have a kind of fickle, overnight audience. We have an audience that very much are very loyal to the band, because they know that the band is really unique, and they can't really get that Porcupine Tree experience from any other band or artist.
Talking of the Porcupine Tree experience, there'll be two versions of the new album, the standard album and a limited deluxe edition featuring lots of wonderful things, including a 116-page hardback book and lots of photography. Why do you go to the trouble of creating that deluxe version?
Because I believe that, really leading on from what I was saying there, I believe music is an art form, and therefore music should be presented as an art form. I mean, it doesn't really make sense to me to spend so much of your life creating this beautiful piece of art in terms of music, and then not to carry through that kind of creativity through to the way you present your art. It seems very odd to me that anybody would do that. And again, I suppose it's partly because of the music I grew up with. I grew up with bands that released albums in beautiful gatefold sleeve with inner bags, and you could really sense that kind of artistic sense, or that artistic aesthetic of presentation going right through the music, through to the artwork, through to the live show, through to everything. And again, I guess that's kind of an old-fashioned notion now, but I love albums that are beautifully presented. For me, it's simply an extension of the passion and the art that you put into the music, and you extend that through to the way you present. And I suppose lyrically, of course, there's a lot going on as well, so sometimes it does help to be able to kind of present a visual interpretation of the lyrics, perhaps to help people to decode what's going on in the lyrics sometimes.
And finally, will there be a big tour in support of the incident?
There certainly will. It starts in a couple of weeks in America, and I believe we're scheduled to get around to Australia in January.
Fantastic news. Stephen Wilson, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure. Nice to speak to you.